They were whispers in taverns, warnings on the wind, and nightmares for every empire that dared command the sea. Women who refused to kneel. Women who carved their own destiny on the waves, while the world insisted they were born only to obey. But freedom always comes with a price. When these women were finally captured, the world didn't simply punish them. It made an example of them. Their fate was not sealed by parchment or law. It was carved into skin, bone, and memory. The naval courtrooms where they stood were not places where truth mattered, only obedience. A woman who walked in was already guilty, guilty of breaking the king's law, guilty of breaking the world's rules, guilty of daring to exist beyond the cage built for her. The crowds who gathered to watch their end did not come for justice. They came for a spectacle. At execution dock, the river swallowed the morning light as children perched on their fathers' shoulders, eager to watch a woman choke slowly on the short drop, the cruel dance sailors called the marshal's dance. And if the gallows didn't claim them, the whip did. The cat's tails tore their flesh while the crowd roared with delight, as if pain itself were entertainment. Those spared the rope suffered fates even darker. Sold into slavery, forced into concubinage, or left to rot in the hell of prison ships, where disease, hunger, and silence did what the empire couldn't finish cleanly. Their stories were meant to be erased, forgotten, swallowed by the tide. But legends have a way of surviving. And the truth about what really happened to female pirates after capture is far more terrifying and far more powerful than history dared to admit. They were not born pirates. No woman ever was. Most began their lives in places the world forgot, salt-stained fishing villages, crumbling port towns, or cramped city alleys where hunger taught more about survival than any mother could. They were daughters of sailors lost to storms, daughters of mothers worked to the bone, daughters of kingdoms that cared nothing for the poor. But somewhere between the beatings of daily life and the suffocating expectations shackled to their sex, something inside them snapped. Not in violence, in clarity. The sea did not judge them. The sea did not cage them. The sea did not tell them what a woman could or could not be. So they followed the wind. Some disguised themselves as men, binding their chests and roughening their voices. Others climbed aboard as stowaways. Some were carried off by pirates and instead of crying for rescue, chose to stay. And a rare few, the boldest, marched onto pirate decks openly as women, daring any man to challenge their place. And somehow, impossibly, they rose. Not through luck, not through mercy, but through teeth and fire. They fought alongside men who had seen 100 battles. They steered ships through tempests that devoured entire fleets. They led raids on merchant vessels with the same cold precision as any captain. And little by little, a rumor spread across the seas, whispered by trembling merchants, bitter naval officers, and drunken sailors. There are women among them. At first, no one believed it. The idea alone was an insult to the order of the world. But then came sightings. A flash of red hair on a storm-dark deck. A woman's voice shouting commands through cannon smoke. A blade held steady by a slender but unshaking hand. Fear followed quickly. And then outrage. To the empires of the world, a man could be a criminal, a rebel, even a monster. But a woman who dared to command violence, loyalty, or freedom, she was something else entirely. She was an affront, a violation, a crack in the foundation of everything men believed they controlled. So laws hardened. Bounties increased, and the hunt began. Naval ships stalked the Caribbean like wolves, searching not just for pirates, but for the women among them. For these women represented a danger far greater than theft or bloodshed. They represented possibility. For every woman who sailed free, 1,000 others might begin to wonder if they, too, could break their chains. And that was a threat no empire could tolerate. So the world prepared its courtroom, its noose, its whip, its silence. Because to crush a woman pirate meant more than stopping a crime. It meant restoring the order of men. The moment a captured female pirate was dragged into a naval courtroom, her fate was no longer a question. It was a performance, a ritual, a declaration of power. The courtroom itself was a chamber of damp stone, cold air, and walls that echoed every whisper like a confession. The scent of seawater seeped through cracked windows, mixing with the iron smell of old chains and older fear. Men in powdered wig sat above her like judges carved from ice. Not one had ever sailed a pirate ship. Not one had ever fought a storm. Not one knew her story, and none cared to. To them, she was not a woman. She was a symbol, a disruption that had to be crushed swiftly and publicly. Her shackles dragged against the floor, each metallic scrape a reminder that she had already lost. The courtroom spectators, merchants, officers' wives, and even children leaned forward, eager for a glimpse of the creature they had been told was both monstrous and unnatural. A woman pirate. A contradiction. An offense. The judge would list her crimes with rehearsed disgust. Piracy, theft, violence, improper conduct for a female. The last charge was often spoken with more venom than the rest. Testimonies came from terrified sailors, eager to distance themselves. They exaggerated her strength, her cruelty, her defiance, painting her as something more beast than human. A woman who wielded a sword, they claimed, must surely wield the devil as well. But the courtroom never needed evidence. Her existence was the crime. Anne Bonny and Mary Read stood in such a place in 1720, chains cold against their skin. They listened as their lives were twisted into a theater of condemnation. When Calico Jack was sentenced, Bonny's words cut the room apart. If you had fought like a man, you would not have been hanged like a dog. Gasps filled the chamber, not because she insulted him, but because she dared to speak. Such defiance only hardened the court's resolve. Bonny and Reed were spared only because of the life growing inside them, a temporary shield the law grudgingly acknowledged. But most female pirates were not pregnant. Most had no shield. Most left the courtroom with a single word echoing in their skulls: death. The sentence was delivered with chilling calm, as if the judge were ordering wine instead of a life. The courtroom spectators nodded, satisfied. Order had been restored. The world had been corrected. Because to the empire, it was not enough to kill a pirate. They needed to prove that a woman who dared to rise would always be dragged back into the dirt. The courtroom was only the beginning. Outside waited the rope, the crowd, and the cruelest stage of all: execution dock. The walk to execution dock was not a walk at all. It was a parade. A cruel, grotesque celebration of death. Female pirates were taken from Newgate prison at dawn, when the city was still yawning awake. But the people knew. They always knew. By sunrise, crowds already pressed against the narrow streets, eager to witness the final humiliation of a woman who dared to live beyond her station. The cart that carried her rattled over the cobblestones, wooden wheels groaning under the weight of history. Soldiers flanked her on every side, not because she was dangerous. The shackles digging into her wrists and ankles made escape impossible, but because the empire needed control. Every moment had to be perfect, every step symbolic. A woman in chains. A lesson on display. Children sat on their fathers' shoulders, pointing and whispering. Women gossiped behind gloved hands, wondering how a creature like her ever survived on a pirate ship. Drunken men jeered, shouting insults as though each word could scratch away her dignity. But many female pirates did not bow their heads. Some stared back, eyes hard as iron. Some even smirked, a final act of rebellion. And that defiance infuriated the crowd more than anything. Execution dock waited at the river's edge, a skeletal wooden platform jutting out over the muddy Thames. The tide was low, exposing the dark, glistening sludge beneath. The gallows loomed above it, stark and merciless. The Admiralty did not grant pirates the dignity of a swift death. There was no long drop, no sudden snap of the neck. Instead came the short drop, a method designed not to kill but to choke. Slowly, painfully, publicly. Sailors called it the marshal's dance, a macabre term born from the way a dying body kicked and writhed, struggling desperately for air that would never come. The condemned woman was made to stand beneath the beam, the noose rough against her throat, her hands tied, her ankles trembling. The crowd quieted in anticipation, a collective breath drawn not out of respect but hunger. Mary Critchett met this fate in 1729. No pleas, no delays, no mercy. Her name was shouted once, then swallowed by the river. But her defiance, that lived longer than her body. Those the Admiralty viewed as particularly wicked suffered worse. Their corpses were left hanging until 3 tides washed over their feet. The water lapped higher with each cycle, soaking their clothes, softening their skin, dragging them inch by inch toward oblivion. A final, silent message to every watching soul. The sea may take you, but the empire will finish you. Execution dock was more than a place of death. It was a stage on which empires reaffirmed their power and erased the women who challenged it. A spectacle designed to crush not only bodies, but ideas. But even the gallows could not silence every story. Because long after the crowds dispersed, after the river reclaimed its stillness, the memory of those women lingered, haunting the water, whispering through the fog. And some said the sea mourned them. Before a woman pirate ever reached the gallows, many felt the bite of a punishment meant to break them long before death did. The whip, the cat o' nine tails, a weapon made of knotted cords, metal tips and cruelty sharpened over centuries. Unlike the gallows, which ended life, the whip was designed to end spirit. Public flogging had become a ritual across naval ports, a violent theater that drew crowds like a festival. People gathered not out of duty, but out of hunger. They wanted to see a woman brought low. They wanted to watch her bleed, to be reminded of what happened when a woman stepped outside the lines drawn for her. The setting was always carefully chosen. The docks, a prison gate, a naval ship's deck, places where the sea breeze carried the echo of the lash far enough to reach every corner of the harbor. The condemned woman was tied to a post or the ship's mast. Her wrists stretched above her head until her joints screamed. Her back exposed, vulnerable, tense with anticipation and terror. The executioner approached slowly, as though savoring the moment. The whip uncoiled like a serpent from his hand. And the crowd leaned in. The first strike always stunned the body, a shockwave of pain that stole breath and thought. By the second, skin split. By the fifth, blood trickled. By the 10th, it ran freely. But for women pirates, the punishment carried an extra layer of humiliation. The crowd didn't just want pain. They wanted a spectacle. They mocked her, laughed at her, said she should have stayed home, said this was what happened when a woman tried to be a man. Yet some women, impossibly, refused to scream. Some bit their lips until they bled, determined not to give their tormentors a victory. Some stared straight ahead, seeing not the crowd but the sea. And some met every lash with a fury that terrified even the executioner. There are whispers in old naval records of women who endured 50, 60, even 100 lashes without begging for mercy. Their backs became canvases of crimson, their skin torn open like parchment, but their spirit did not break. This terrified the authorities far more than their crimes ever had. Because punishment only works if the punished surrender. Some women were flogged as part of their sentence, others to extract confessions, and some simply to remind them and every woman watching that freedom was not theirs to claim. When the flogging ended, the woman was cut down, her body trembling, her clothes soaked in blood and sweat. Some collapsed immediately. Others, unbelievably, steadied themselves, forced their legs to stand, and glared at the crowd as if daring them to look away. Those faces stayed with sailors for years. Even hardened captains admitted they had seen fewer braver souls at sea. But the whip was not the worst fate. For those who escaped execution and torture, darker paths awaited them, ones hidden from public view, shrouded in silence and shadow. Because some women weren't killed. They were claimed. Not every female pirate was marched to the gallows. Not every back was torn by the whip. Some women met a fate far quieter and far crueler. They vanished. Once a pirate ship was captured, the men were usually taken to trial. They were logged, recorded, measured, judged. Their names entered the court transcripts, even if only to be condemned. But the women, they were often never written down at all. Spanish and Portuguese governors, colonial officers, and private merchants all had their own methods of dealing with female property, found aboard pirate vessels. And in the chaotic swirl of empire, piracy, and slave trading, the lines between criminal and captive blurred into something monstrous. To the powerful, a woman without a protector, a rank, or a recognized legal status was not a person. She was an asset, a commodity, spoils of war. The moment she stepped off the captured ship, her future was decided by men who saw opportunity in her silence. If she was poor, she was disposable. If she was indigenous, she was savaged property. If she was African or mixed race, she was assumed to already belong to someone. And so the auctions began. Some were sold into plantation slavery, their hands forced to work sugar fields until their bodies collapsed in the heat. Others were taken into wealthy homes as domestic servants, the silent shadows, who scrubbed floors for the same officers who boasted about capturing pirates at dinner tables. But the darkest fate was concubinage, a word that masked a reality too brutal to name plainly. Governors' mansions, military outposts, merchant houses, all of them turned captured women into private possessions. There was no trial, no record, no witness. These women were absorbed into households like furniture. Some were forced to bear children they never asked for. Some died from the cruelty of their masters. Some lived long enough to forget their own names. Worse still, many were never even recognized as pirates. Their identities were erased the moment they were claimed. Historians searching colonial archives find small notes in the margins: one muleta woman taken from the pirate brig, 3 girls processed and reassigned, a native woman transferred for service. None of these women were given names, not in life, not in record, not in death. They did not become legends. They did not earn ballads. They did not leave testimonies. They simply disappeared into the machinery of empire. And this was the empire's true victory. Not killing them, but erasing them. Not punishing their rebellion, but ensuring no one would ever know they existed at all. Yet even in silence, these women left shadows, faint outlines of lives buried under centuries of dust. A ghostly reminder that freedom, once tasted, carries a price deeper than death. A reminder that the world feared not the crimes of these women, but their possibilities. But the sea had one more fate waiting, one that swallowed captives whole without trial or auction. The floating tombs of the prison ships. For some captured female pirates, death did not come with the swing of the rope, or the crack of a whip, or the silent transaction of an auction. It came slowly, quietly, in the darkness of the prison ships. These vessels once sailed proudly under the flags of great empires, their decks alive with cannons, sailors, and the ambitions of kings. But when they grew too old, too damaged, or too costly to repair, the Navy gutted them, stripped them, anchored them in harbors like forgotten carcasses, and turned them into cages. Prison hulks they were called, floating worlds of rot and disease. To step aboard one was to enter hell. The air below deck was thick and unbreathable, heavy with sweat, vomit, and the sweet, sickening stench of death. The wooden beams dripped with damp. Rats gnawed at the sleeping, unafraid of retaliation. The walls crawled with insects. Light barely touched the interior. The sun was a luxury reserved for those who lived above chains. Prisoners were crammed together in iron shackles, men, boys, and sometimes women. It didn't matter if they were pirates, rebels, debtors, or simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. The empire didn't distinguish. To them, a prisoner was a prisoner. But women on board suffered twice. Disease took them first: typhus, dysentery, smallpox, illnesses that spread through the cramped decks like wildfire. Food was moldy. Water was foul. Many starved slowly, their bodies shrinking until their bones cut through their skin. Yet death by illness was merciful compared to what came next. The guards. Some were cruel for sport, some for power, and some because, inside these floating tombs, no one could hear a woman scream. Such abuses rarely made it onto official reports. Why record what no one cared to change? Why document suffering that the empire believed was deserved? Women disappeared here, not into plantations or households, but into darkness itself. Their names were never written. Their bodies never buried. Their existence never acknowledged. When a prisoner died, the guards did not bother with ceremony. They opened the hatch, dragged the limp body across the deck, and tossed it into the harbor. The splash was the only funeral these women received. The tide carried them away, indifferent to the life they once fought so fiercely to control. And so the prison ships earned their reputation. Graveyards without tombstones, punishments without witnesses, stories without endings. Sailors claimed the ships were haunted, that at night they heard footsteps on the deck though no living prisoner was allowed above. That sometimes, through the fog, a woman's voice whispered from beneath the boards, calling for a freedom that never came. Whether these ghosts were real did not matter. The women who died there left echoes strong enough to be felt for centuries. But despite everything, the courts, the gallows, the lash, the slavery, the ships, the empire still failed in one mission: to break the legend of the women who defied them. Because legends don't die with bodies. They grow in the shadows. They rise in the whispers of sailors. And they cling to the sea long after the last tide has passed. Only one truth remained. Female pirates terrified the world not because they were violent, but because they were free. Long after the trials ended, the gallows emptied, the whips fell silent, and the prison ships rotted into the sea, something unexpected happened, something the empires never prepared for. The women they tried to erase refused to disappear, not in the way the empire expected. Their names did not fill the history books. The court transcripts barely mentioned them. Their graves did not exist. Their faces were never painted by royal artists. When scholars spoke of piracy, they spoke of men, Blackbeard, Bartholomew Roberts, Henry Morgan, as though the seas had room only for masculine legends. But the truth lived elsewhere. It lived in the shadows. In the cracks of history, the empire couldn't fully seal. In the stories whispered by sailors who saw more than they dared admit. There was a woman among them, some would say over tankards of rum, eyes wide with memory. She fought harder than any of us, others muttered, voices lowered as if speaking too loudly might summon her ghost. And then the softest confession of all. And she wasn't afraid. Fearless women were dangerous. Fearless women were unforgettable. Fearless women left marks no court could cleanse. Even the sea, indifferent as it was, seemed to hold onto their stories. Storms were said to carry their voices. Waves were said to echo their final battles. Lonely sailors swore that if you listened closely on a windless night, you could hear footsteps pacing the deck, soft, steady, determined. A captain once wrote in his private logbook that he saw a figure standing on the water at dawn, a woman with hair whipping like fire in the wind, watching his ship with unblinking eyes. He never sailed that route again. Legends grew from fear, yes, but also from respect. Because the world eventually realized something profound. Female pirates terrified empires not because they were brutal, but because they were possibility incarnate. They proved a woman could command men, could fight wars, could take ships, could chase freedom with a blade in hand and fire in her heart. They represented a world the empires feared, a world where women were not silent, obedient, or owned. And so the empire tried to drown them. Through courts, through ropes, through whips, through slavery, through prison hulks, through silence. But legends survive where bodies cannot. Today, their names echo not through royal halls, but through the waves they once conquered. Their stories rise not from marble statues, but from the salt, wind, and memory of the sea itself. A sea that never judged them. A sea that never tried to tame them. A sea that held their secrets long after men forgot their faces. And somewhere in the endless horizon, among the shifting tides and restless storms, the truth still lingers. A woman who chose freedom was the most dangerous pirate of all.